February meeting of Welcome to the February meeting of the Human Rights Advisory Commission for City of Beaverton. I'd like to welcome all of you. And right now I'm going to give the floor to Spencer to give a land acknowledgement. Spencer.
Thanks, Joy. Good evening, everyone. Recently, the Washington County Commission adopted a land acknowledgement. They prepared it. It was prepared by representatives of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Nez Perce, Siletz, and Yavapai. We want to acknowledge the people on whose land we live. The Aftafadi Kalapuians, also known as the Tualatin Band of Kalapuians, the first inhabitants of Washington County. We are grateful for the land we are on, Kalapuian land. Signers of the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 were removed from their homelands to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. Today, their descendants are tribal members of Grand Ronde and Siletz tribes, carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the ancestors of this place and recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their contribution and continuation in our community. Please reflect on the role government has played in the painful colonial history, and reflect as well on the resilience and healing of the indigenous land and communities. We would like to invite everyone to collaborate and work together with the tribes to take care of the land and water and the people who inhabit these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. And everyone, welcome. I don't know if any more people joined us during that. And now we move on to the minutes. I'm going to ask before I hand it to the vice chair, did everyone receive a copy that's a member of the commission? All right, Sabdy.
Spencer, sorry, were you shaking your head before I go?
No, go.
Okay, cool. So are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as submitted? None. Okay, hearing none, the minutes stand as approved as, oh, go ahead, Karen.
I didn't receive a copy of the minutes, but I'm an alternate. I don't know if I get them.
So you do get them. I can't tell you right now if you would have received them, but I know that they were sent out on Thursday of last week.
There was a problem with my email address, as you might recall from last meeting. Email. I mean, I'm on here through the email, but on the roster, it was wrong.
Okay.
So anyway.
Okay.
I'll make a note about that, Karen, and I can send them to you right now. I'll send them to you right now.
Thank you.
Can you, would you mind dropping your email in the chat?
Okay. Joy, do you want to approve at the end of the meeting or go ahead and proceed?
We can go ahead and approve them, and we can come back if there's a giant change. You would think one of us would catch something. Karen's pretty thorough, though. She might find we could come back and amend them later if necessary.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward then. Okay, any other additions or corrections? None. Okay, hearing none, the minutes stand approved as submitted.
Thank you, Sabdy. And I think now it's public participation. I think Alexis has a handle on that. She has the power and the control. She's powerful today. And Alexis, thank you very much for covering for Paolo, who is out today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I think I know most of you or all of you. Thanks for the chat, Amy. I'm sorry I didn't recognize your name right at the beginning. Yeah, I'm Alexis Ball, Equity and Inclusion Manager. I'm just sitting in for Paolo because he's out sick today. We have three folks in the attendees to the meeting. So would any of Lisa, Monica, Rahman, would you like to make a comment, please? I've unmuted you, so you can speak. You can go ahead and raise your hand or put in the chat if you'd like to make a comment at this time. Oh, sorry, Lisa. See, I need to memorize this, your roster. We have Monica and Rahman, who are both members of the Diversity Advisory Board, so they may be here just to participate in the meeting and observe the CJC presentation. I don't see any raised hands at this point, so we can turn it back to you, Joy.
Perfect, thank you. So let's proceed with our liaison updates. We'll start with our city councilor who's on a train, so we should get her in while we can get her. Ashley.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I don't have a video on for you today. I have a mask on, so you can't see most of my face anyways. Let's see. The short legislative session has begun as of yesterday. And so City Council's kind of monitoring priority bills and really making sure that we're advocating for things that match our priorities and goals for our community and opposing things that do not. I think I shared last time that we had done our retreat and come up with our 4 main priority areas. And we're still kind of working through our goals. So we'll be having a work session in 2 weeks to really deep dive into that. And it'll be tied into the work plan for the year. So we're excited to see that come together and get to share all with you in a more formal way, our goals and priorities for the coming year. In this past month, since I've seen y'all, we had a presentation about the downtown equity strategy. And if you haven't read about that yet or heard about it, I will pop in a link to the chat about it. Really great work for some large investments that are going to be going on in downtown Beaverton and making sure that we are doing adequate outreach and engagement with our community. So one of the things we heard from our community was that we ask them things a lot. So let's make sure we're listening to what they have, what they've shared with us. So I'm really excited about that. And I think that's my main update. So if you have questions for me, feel free to ask away. And if I don't know the answer, I will get them for you.
Thank you, Ashley. Or is it counselor?
Ashley is just fine with me. Thank you.
Okay. Chief, you're next on the list. Do you want to go next?
Well, I certainly do. Hello,
Fantastic.
everyone. I don't have a lot of updates. I know Ken is here to do the stop presentation, so I will be very brief. Not a lot going on at the PD. We're battling through COVID, and right now I'm happy to say we don't have one officer at home quarantining or anything like that. We're totally healthy right now, which is really great. The second thing I'd like to talk about is last Monday, we opened our joint reserve officer and cadet academy, which was kind of surreal to me because I haven't been in a training environment where there was actually people there for about 2 years. But all in a big room, socially distanced, masked, all that. And so very, very excited to get that up and rolling. In addition, we're gonna hopefully have our community academy back online in the spring. And hopefully once we get that going, again, that our next one will be a community academy in Spanish, which is a huge, huge goal for us to get that and not just have one, have many in the future. So with that, I will, if no one has any questions, I will turn it over back to Joy.
Are there any questions for Chief?
Yes.
So what was it called that you got freaked out and all these humans in a room? What was that meeting that you had with the cadets and?
Oh, no. I'm sorry, Tanya. It was the cadets and the reserve academy. Okay. We started our academy and we were able to do that because we don't have as many applicants and we were able to spread them out for COVID. When in the past the last 2 years, we haven't been able to do that.
Perfect, thank you.
Uh-huh.
It is shocking to be in a room with people. I gotta say, I'm surprised. It's a lot more tiring than I remember.
Yeah.
So next on our list, we have our Mayor's Youth Advisory person, Amy. I know you're here.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So basically, MYAB for the last month, we've been online, so we didn't meet in person just because of, COVID concerns. But we were lucky enough to have a tour of the Research Center last Thursday, which is where we'll be holding our Youth Summit, May 26th. So we were able to tour that space and figure out which rooms we'd be using and how we'd better structure that. So we're super excited about that. Right now, our general structure is we're going to have like an opening session, a couple of rooms where people will be able to go to experience either discussions or hear from panelists or speakers. And so those will be centered around getting help and also kind of sharing resources. So doing social justice workshops or hearing from speakers that can help people get into certain career fields or help with college searches, stuff like that. So we're hoping that the Youth Summit is just a general event where youth from across Beaverton can come and, receive help that they might normally not have access to. So yeah, we're really excited about that. Another subcommittee is currently working on more of like an equitable education initiative, kind of similar to one of the workshops we're having at the Youth Summit, just focusing around college and career planning. So I hope to have more information to you guys about that next month. But yeah, a lot of stuff going on with MYAB. Things are kind of looking up for this year. So yeah.
Fantastic. Tanya, do you have your hand up?
Well, no, forgot to put it in. Sorry.
That sounds really exciting, Amy. You're really moving forward. I'm excited to hear how that goes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So next we have the city update with Alexis, which you don't look suspicious. We're used to seeing your name, but you usually have a bald head, which you don't have today. And you usually look a little more Paolo.
Shine it. I covered it up, shined it up, and then covered it up today. No.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm happy to share staff liaison updates. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen as I just kind of talk you through them real quick. I'm not sure if you all received them previously, or if not, I can send them out tonight as well. But there's just a couple of items on there today. The first one is about the Beaverton Community Vision, which is being refreshed now. So as you all may or may not know, there's a sort of sister board to you all that's called the Visioning Advisory Committee, or the VAC. And so they are working hard on figuring out what the plan looks like for outreach. Currently, there's been some surveys and some plans for focus groups and live events and other things. They've got definitely some targeted outreach planned, making sure that we get to populations that we don't hear from as much. If you're not familiar, the vision started back in 2010 and then was updated in 2016, and now we're updating it again today. And it's just a really important document that helps inform the city's work in all ways, really. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a website. I'm sure you'll also be prompted again to participate in future surveys and input opportunities. I think you already have been, hopefully. City council elections are coming up. There are, the filing deadline is coming up on March 8th, and there's information available currently through the website and through the city recorder. There are 4 different positions that are all at-large positions. Councilor position 1, 2, and 5 will be at the primary election, nominated and then voted on in November, of course. And then there's also 1 position that is vacant because Councilor Fagan is resigning from the council, and so there's 3 years left on that term. Those are the different positions that are open. Some basic eligibility requirements: being 18, being qualified to vote, and living in the city. The primary election will be on May 17th and general on November 8th. And then just some information on how to tune into council meetings. There's some big things coming up this month on the agenda, including the school resource officer review, Milliken Way project, and downtown equity strategy updates. And then you'll see some work sessions as well around the legislative session coming up, the capital improvement projects, priorities, and reimbursement districts. And then the city council is also going to look at their strategic goals that they identified during their retreat and talk about the work plan for those items. So February 8th, 16th, and 22nd are the upcoming agendas. And as you may know, you can always find the agendas, minutes, videos, and all of that on the website, beavertonoregon.gov/citycouncil. So that's what I have for you tonight.
Fantastic.
Can you send that summary to me? It would be grand, or put it in already. Okay. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And we are now ahead of schedule. Are there any questions about the lightning fast liaison updates we just got? We are cooking with gas tonight. That's awesome. So it's my pleasure to 10 minutes early turn the meeting over to the Beaverton Police Department to do their presentation on the STAP data, which I'm really looking forward to hearing.
Well, thank you very much. As you know, I think last year we presented to the DAB, and this year we're just going to present to you all with the stops data because this is recorded, and some people from DAB are here, and anybody can watch it later. So Ken has been very kind enough to give up his evening to come and present the stop data, which can be kind of difficult to understand some of the graphs, or at least it is for me. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Sanchagrin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And for much of my time at the Commission, I have been the Director of the Oregon's Statistical Transparency of Policing Program, or STOP program. I'm here tonight. I have a prepared presentation to go over the results that we have for Beaverton Police Department. I'm going to share my screens shortly. I have a lot of visuals on there. Once I share my screen, it's a little bit difficult for me to see folks. And so I encourage you to ask questions as we go, because it's easier than if we have to jump back around later. But sometimes I may not see you, so also feel free to just shout at me. Also with me tonight, but more on a fly on the wall role, is my research director, Kelly Officer. I think she's just popping on her camera now. She is now the STOP program director, so she oversees all of the analyses that we do. And so if we have technical issues or questions, or she might jump in and give me a lifeline here or there if needed. But she's along here with us tonight too. So I'm going to share my screen now. The one last thing I'll apologize for is I have young children who love YouTube. And so if I start breaking up at any moment, please let me know, and I'll text my wife to tell them to read a book.
The world of Zoom now. Yeah.
Okay, so can everybody see just the title slide of the presentation? Perfect. Great. So the Statistical Transparency of Policing program has been around since 2017. During the 2017 long session, the legislature passed HB 2355, which did two things. First, it was one of the first steps Oregon took in defelonizing drug possession before Measure 110. But then it also created what has now been named the Statistical Transparency of Policing program. And the whole purpose behind this program was to have a central repository where all law enforcement agencies across the state would report details on every single officer-initiated discretionary traffic and pedestrians. So when I say discretionary, that means that calls for service are not included in this data. So if somebody calls the police department and requests an officer, or if officers are investigating a crime in progress, for example, those would not be included. But if somebody initiates a traffic stop or initiates an interaction with a pedestrian, then those are the types of data that we would have in our database. In addition to just that as being the universe of data we're talking about here, the mandated to be collected by the legislature are pretty far reaching. They include all of the necessary information about the stop itself. Where did it happen? When did it happen? Day of the week, time of day, those types of things. Why did it happen? So what was the reason for the stop? What happened during the stop? So was there a search conducted? Did the individual get a citation? Were they arrested? But then also the demographic information of the individual who was involved. So their perceived race, ethnicity, gender, age, and those types of information. And so that gives us a pretty rich database of different data points that we're able to use through various analyses to test for systemic issues related to racial disparities. And so what I'm going to do is just explain a little bit about the analytical approach that we take briefly, and then I'll jump into results. Like I said, stop me anytime, and then afterwards too, we can have any discussion that you all would like to have. So our analytical approach, one thing that we were required to do in statute was we were given around a year's worth of time to develop an analytical approach that is consistent with best practices and research practices. And so we looked into the academic literature, we looked to other states that are doing this type of research to come up with an analytical approach that was consistent with what is the cutting edge across the country. Historically, however, what we have mostly seen in traffic stop analyses, and I'll say historically, but then also currently, there are other states that still use some of these outdated approaches. Historically, stops data has been analyzed solely by using what is known as a benchmark analysis. And all a benchmark analysis does is it ties the share of stops that you have broken down by any demographic factor to some sort of benchmark, oftentimes residential census data. And so what we actually have here is Beaverton Police Department stops broken down by the different racial and ethnic categories that we collect in the stop data collection, compared to the closest census categories that we have. But a lot of academic research, mostly within the past decade or so, has demonstrated that the reliance on this type of analysis solely to determine whether there are disparities or not, it's flawed, and oftentimes itself can lead to biased results. In addition to that, when we have a benchmark analysis that demonstrates that there may be a gap in between a stops data breakdown and census data breakdown, it doesn't really do us any good or help us to understand what might be driving those differences. So for example, when we look at the data that we have here, we do see that there are some mismatches, certainly between the Beaverton PD stop breakdown and the residential census data. For example, we can see a pretty big gap here, but what we're unable to do when we simply look at the data like this is we're not really able to control for or even consider factors such as driving behavior differences in exposure to the police. And then certainly we could probably assume that if we have gaps that are very large in different jurisdictions, there might be some racial animus there as well, or conscious or unconscious bias. And so what we're trying to do when we pick out the analyses that we do, we're trying to isolate these other factors as best as possible. But when it really comes down to it, when we look at the comparison between benchmarks and the stops data we have, the two primary reasons, besides the literature informing us on this, that we don't really like to make these comparisons is, first, the census categories that we see on this slide, they don't match up with the categories that we collect in the stops data. And in addition to that, we know that the driving population of a given area is oftentimes very different from that residential census population. And that's because the people commute in and out of our communities, not necessarily that they always look very different compared to the folks who are living in our community, but it's going to vary throughout the day or depending on the day of the week, for people commuting for work or for entertainment and things like that. And that's especially true in some of our communities here in Oregon. So whenever I do one of these presentations, I always go to this nifty website. It's called On the Map, and it uses census data and then also employment information to try to demonstrate what are the commuting patterns for people when they come and go from work in a given area. And when I put in the city of Beaverton, I have to admit, this is what it shows us is that almost 90% of the people who work in Beaverton come from somewhere else. In fact, you can see the little breakdown here on the lower right-hand part of the slide. In fact, more people who work in Beaverton come from Portland than actually live in Beaverton. And at this 87.7%, it's actually one of the highest ones I've found in the state of just the cities that I've done these presentations for. And this is just to illustrate the fact that in the city of Beaverton, at least during working hours, or maybe during non-COVID working hours, there are a substantial number of people on the roads who don't necessarily live in the area. Therefore, again, showing that the reliance on census benchmarks is not necessarily the best way to do these sorts of things. And so what does this mean? It means that we want to make sure that we have analyses that don't rely on some of these pieces of these data points. But then also we are also trying to deal with the fact that there's this complicating factor of COVID, which I've already just very briefly mentioned, and the fact that COVID has oftentimes led to very different driving populations than we might have even seen a few years ago. As a middle-aged white man who works in a white-collar job, I have benefited from the fact that I have been able to come to all of my meetings and come to you tonight from my bedroom. But that also means that I no longer have to commute into Salem every day, so I'm not contributing to their driving population. However, we know that members of the BIPOC community have been disproportionately represented by frontline jobs, and therefore are more likely to be on the roads than they used to in the past. Therefore, this all goes back to the idea of exposure to the police and whether these are factors that might influence the stop data trends that we're seeing. So what do we do to solve this? We utilize 3 different research approaches that look at slightly different parts of the decision to stop and then what happens during a traffic stop. And so the first analysis that we look at, it is solely focused on who is being stopped in the first place. And we model that by looking at the differences between stops that are made in the daylight versus stops that are made at night. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in just a moment. The second analysis we do is to look at what is the outcome of the stop. We call this our predicted disposition analysis because we want to know whether different dispositions, which means citations, searches, arrests, whether those differ across our racial groups that we have in our data. The third is looking at searches and successful search rates. One of the areas that has been shown in other jurisdictions to be the most concerning, especially around stop and frisk laws or stop and frisk policies, has been searches that are being conducted of individuals. And so we focus on that for our third analysis. But I will mention that the analyses that we conduct, we are merely folks who are sitting in Salem working with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines of code and data. So what we are looking for are systematic department-wide indicators of disparities. We cannot detect whether a single traffic stop resulted in an outcome that made somebody feel uncomfortable or an outcome that made somebody feel unsafe. And so we're not able to get into those types of instances. We are looking, like I said, for these department-wide indicators of disparities. And so we cannot use these statistics to either prove or disprove disparities either way. However, when we do find disparities, that is something that's concerning and something that we work with agencies to try to remedy. So we'll get into the results and also give a little bit more detail about each of our analyses as we go through those. So first, just for a general orientation as to the stop volume and what we see across Beaverton Police Department, total stops have fallen within Beaverton PD by around almost 40% over the past 3 years of analysis. Beaverton is one of our tier 1 agencies, which means that they've been in our data collection the longest, along with our other large agencies in the state. And so we can see that in the past 3 years of data collection, comparing the first year to our most recent one, which admittedly is during COVID, we've seen around 7,000 fewer stops than we saw in our first year of data collection. Now, this is not something that's unique to Beaverton PD. Across all tier 1 agencies, we did not see these types of reductions in all of them, but certainly among our Washington County tier 1 agencies and among a lot of our tier 1 agencies, we saw a similar reduction over this time period, some of which we know is due to COVID. In fact, if you were able to plot the stops by day or by month on a graph, you're able to see these huge dips. It actually somewhat mirrors, but in the opposite direction, our COVID case counts. as we've kind of navigated through this world that we're in. But then I think some of it is also due to just changing approaches in policing and patterns that we see across the larger enterprise across the state. So moving to our decision to stop a driver, I mentioned that the way that we try to assess whether drivers are being stopped disproportionately is we compare stops that are being made in the daylight to stops that are being made in darkness. This is a test that is often thought of as the gold standard in analyses for traffic stop disparities. It was first proposed by some criminologists in the academic world and is now being applied in many areas across through state government and elsewhere. And what the whole idea is that we want to compare stops that are being made in the daylight, where it is much easier to discern the race of a driver, to stops being made in darkness, where it is difficult or sometimes impossible to tell who's behind the wheel of a car. But we don't want to compare stops being made at midnight to stops being made at noon, because we know that driving populations are likely different during those times. And so the way that these academic researchers were able to get around some of those concerns is that they compare stops being made essentially during the morning and the evening commutes. And they do that because, as we all know, as we go through the year, it is light or it is dark during these time periods at different times, depending on the time of year. So just a couple months ago, near the end of December, we were all very depressed when around 4:30 it was dark. However, we can think about a time in the summer when at 4:30 it is certainly plenty bright out and it is still light until pretty late in the evening. We take these slices of time, that morning commute and evening commute, and we conduct an analysis there, because then we're able to compare, for example, a slice of time. We can look at the 5 o'clock evening commute. And sometimes during the year, that commute time is in the darkness, sometimes it's in the light. And the assumption is that the people who are driving in that 5 o'clock hour are generally consistent throughout the year. And that's how we're able to make some comparisons on the same population to ensure that individuals are being treated fairly. We have created a visual on our website, which you could find following the link here, for every agency. And so the visual that we have here, it's just a static visual, but it's the one for the city of Beaverton for this analysis that hopefully can begin to illustrate a little bit of what we're talking about here. So for this visual, what you'll see is that every stop is color-coded by both race and ethnicity and time of day. Aside from the gray dots, which are the ones we don't examine because they're not during those commute times, you can see the colorful dots that are on the screen, and each one of those represents a stop. And if you go to our website and you're actually using the interactive piece of our website, you can actually hover over every box and it will tell you the time of day that stop was made, the race of the individual. And so it kind of gives you an idea of where these stops are happening. On our visual here, we have the time of day along the vertical axis and the time of year along the horizontal axis. And you can see from the color coding as well, especially on the top, you can kind of see the way that we have this little inverted U shape. And that is what represents that difference between daylight and darkness as we go through the year. So these are our two analysis points. And then you can see, like I said, the different stops. And so those are the stops that we are comparing to determine whether there are indicators of disparity. So here are the results that we have reported over our last 3 reports that you can find on our website. And what we are looking for here is that if the stop rates between daylight and darkness for a given racial group are perfectly equal, which is what we would hope to find, then the value of their statistic that we have right here would be 1. That is perfect equity. However, we know that in statistics, it's rare that you ever get 100% perfect equity. So we also assess what is called the statistical significance of these results. And at least across all of our analyses for the city of Beaverton, we have not found yet a statistically significant difference between stop rates of different drivers in the daylight versus the darkness for Beaverton PD. You'll also notice that in our 1921 analysis, we have expanded into looking at Asian and Pacific Islander individuals within the city, and then also stops of Middle Eastern individuals. What we have begun to do now that we have multiple years of data is to actually do 2-year slices of time, because sometimes the stop rates for some of our groups that are smaller populations within our state are too small to do our analyses. And so we expanded that so that we could do our analyses with those groups. And so for all of these, we feel pretty confident that the stop rates are being done in an equitable manner across our different racial groups. The second type of analysis that we conduct is we call it our predicted disposition analysis. And what we're interested in here is what happens once the stop is made. Is the individual ticketed, or do they receive, just a warning, or does nothing happen to them? But then also, are they searched or arrested? And the way that we're able to do this comparison is we use something called propensity score matching, which is essentially matching groups together on everything but race to try to make sure that people are being treated the same. And so what this means is that you can see this list of variables here. We match folks across their age, their gender, certainly the agency that is pulling them over, stop reason, whether it was daylight out, day of the week. And so what that means is that we're trying to find equal comparisons of folks to try to determine whether they're being treated similarly. So for example, that means you could take myself, where if a 40-year-old white man is stopped on a Tuesday evening, let's say for speeding 15 miles over the speed limit, we are also then looking for a 40-year-old Black or African-American man who was pulled over on a Tuesday night at about 7 o'clock for speeding 10 miles over the limit. And the idea would be that we would hope that those two individuals on average would be treated the same. So when you scale that up to big groups of people, we have matching groups of white individuals who look the same as far as these characteristics as a group of Black or African-American individuals, or as a group of Hispanic or Latinx individuals. And the whole idea is that if you compare our Black and Hispanic group to whites, or you compare our Hispanic Latinx group to whites, they should on average be treated the same. And if they are, then that is good. If we find a statistically significant difference between those groups, that's where we begin to have a concern. So here are the results we've had for the past few years. First, I'll caution that the ones in red are only those that are statistically significant. In our reports, we actually only report the statistically significant differences, simply because we're trying to avoid looking at a mess of numbers like we have here. But I wanted to make sure to provide all of the information to you all tonight, so that when you take this home later and digest it and think about it a little bit more, that you have all of that at your fingertips. Now, for each column, we have 3 different comparisons we're making. We're looking at citation differences, search differences, and arrest differences. And under each of those headings, what we have is our actual stop rate and our predicted stop rate, or the actual arrest rate, or the actual search rate. The actual rate is very, very simple. It is just, if you look at across all, for example, Hispanic individuals in 2018-19, 6.5% of stops of Hispanic individuals resulted in an arrest. There's no data processing or anything that we do to get that number. However, my thing went too fast. I guess I messed up my animations. However, the predicted column, if that thing had not disappeared, I apologize. The predicted column is that comparison group of white individuals. And so what we're looking for there is if the comparison group of white individuals are treated better, and especially if they're treated better or if they have a lower rate of some sort of outcome in a statistically significant manner, then that's where we become concerned. And so we can see that there are some areas that we have flagged, and we have been working with the chief on here in the city that have showed up over the past few years. For example, we do see this gap in arrest rates for Hispanics back in 2018-19. The comparison group of white individuals who were pulled over for the same reason on the same day, who were the same gender, they were arrested 5% of the time. However, our group of Hispanic individuals were arrested 6.5% of the time. If we jump down to our most recent results, and so again, I'm asking you just to focus on the red ones here, we can see that we found 2 different disparities. One was in search rates for Hispanic residents of the city, or Hispanic individuals who were stopped. We would have predicted that Our Hispanic folks would have been searched 3.7% of the time. However, they were searched almost 5% of the time. And then we also have a disparity for citations. And I see that we have a hand up, so I will pause there for question.
Thank you. There doesn't seem to be, I don't understand what determines statistically significant. In looking at the numbers, there is no particular consistency.
Sure, that's a great question. So
37.6 versus 34.7, there's no relationship to 44.4 versus 40.2.
Yeah, that's a great question.
In the citation column.
So the calculation of statistical significance is something that it oftentimes takes several weeks, if not longer, of advanced level statistics to explain in full. But what I'll say is that whether something is statistically significant or not, first of all, the standard itself is that whenever we're dealing with statistics, we know that there is a degree of error, whether that is error in how the data is collected or from other sources. And so just like an opinion poll or just like a presidential poll, those margins of error have to be non-overlapping. Like in presidential politics, when we're looking at two individuals who are running in a race and we say that one is preferred at 50%, or excuse me, at 49%, and one is preferred at 51%, but the margin of error is 3%, we know that it's too difficult to tell whether there is a difference between those things. So what we are doing is essentially the same thing here, but we're just not putting all of these very advanced numbers up on the slide. But what you point out is one thing that is interesting to look at is sometimes these gaps are big, sometimes they're smaller, and there doesn't seem to be this relationship between statistical significance or non. And so a good rule of thumb in looking at these is that something is going to be statistically significant or is more likely to be statistically significant. First, the wider the gap, then the more likely it is to be statistically significant. However, whether statistical significance is present also a function of the size of that group. It's very difficult to find statistical significance when you have a very teeny tiny group. It would be the equivalent of having a presidential opinion poll where you only ask 3 people. It would be very difficult to use that to extrapolate up to make any claim that is worthwhile, right? And so when we're dealing with some of our much smaller groups, in many of our cities across the state, there are not as many. They may be stopped at a disproportionate rate, but there are not as many stops of African Americans as there are of whites, for example, or there may not be as many stops of Asian drivers as there are of whites. And so it is a little bit more difficult to find statistical significance there. And that's why sometimes you'll see these wider gaps or smaller gaps, and they don't seem to follow a predictable pattern. I hope that that made sense. Trying to distill a lot of college coursework down. But essentially, when we see these big gaps, and especially if they're with bigger groups, that's where we're going to find them. It's not very surprising to us at the commission, for example, that across the state, we most consistently find disparities for our Hispanic or Latinx populations, but that is also our largest population that is not white. And so it is just statistically easier to find them. And so it means it's also very difficult to find disparities, for example, for Middle Eastern populations, because that is just one of our, by raw numbers, small groups that we have in our data set. And I see we have another question from the chair.
Yes, thank you. That was a really good explanation. And I understand when you have a very small sample size, it's hard to make the same kinds of extrapolations as you can when you have a large one. I would like, though, to look at the Black and Hispanic numbers for this year, which have been tracked. So I assume that's your largest population being tracked, and it's still more than a point of a Hispanic between predicted and actual for arrest. But it's not highlighted in red when it's a point. It's more than a point. When next to it in the search, it's the same or similar discrepancy and it is highlighted red. So I'm curious about that piece.
Sure, and that one we'd have to delve a little bit more deeply into the more advanced stat. We would have to look at those. Some of these, I'm trying to recall. This is where I wish I had my one analyst who actually does this this analysis with us. We do a multivariate analysis for this, and so there may be other factors that are leading to that not being statistically significant. It's something that we could follow up on if you have some more detailed questions on that one, certainly. But I think it's suffice to say that the other thing is, aside from statistical significance, I'll mention that one thing that is important for anybody who I speak to on these to take away is that what you all are doing here, what the city council has done, when I've spoken with city councils, is exactly what is important in this type of research. We at the state come up with a single method of analyzing this data that we do try to apply to the entire state. Certainly when I'm talking with folks, I presented to the city of Dallas not long ago, and they have 1,200 stops for the entire year. And so basically none of their differences are going to be statistically significant. It's almost impossible to find one that would be statistically significant. And so what's important is, while I can sit up here and wax poetic about statistics and everything else, the real decision as to what is acceptable in your city is held by you, is held by the city council, is held by citizens. And so we try to make as much of this information available as possible. And if a 1 percentage point difference is something that is unacceptable in the city of Beaverton, then I will be wholeheartedly behind you and try to support you with the data so that you can try to improve policing outcomes. However, we are merely trying to show at least as close to an apples to apples comparison for 160 odd agencies as possible. And I see we have another question as well.
Yeah, I have questions, actually, things that would help interpret the data more. I would love to see the numbers of Black, Hispanic, Asian, etc., in addition to the statistics, because sometimes that makes a difference about whether the results have a practical difference or not for people. And I'd also like to see, I'd like to know what the probability cutoffs were. And that's all. You can't do it this year. Yeah.
Well, I do have some of that information. I don't have that for all of our slides, but for example, for the search rates coming up in a moment, we do have the raw numbers. And so I'll be happy to show those to you. And then also, as far as the threshold for statistical significance, we do use the 95% confidence threshold there. But then we also do, it gets a little bit more complicated. We use what is known as a Bonferroni correction because of the number of comparisons that we're doing. That one, that's a little harder even for me to explain. But the overall threshold that we're using is the 95% confidence interval, which means that we want to be 95% confident that the difference that we're identifying is an actual difference and not due to chance or other random error. But I'll be more than happy to show you the other numbers just when we get to the next slide. And apologies that we don't have anything more direct for these outcomes here.
Thank you.
Well, I see some, yeah,
question. So I was curious, like, is this a standardized process for analysis that's being done all over the country? Like, who came up with this approach to determining, the statistical significance? And like, did you have any consultation with BIPOC folks in running this analysis and considering like how we look at this information? Because I have a lot of experience with statistics, and it's pretty common that you can find what you want to find when you're running analysis of this kind of amount of data and these numbers of variables, and it can be easy to see things you want to see or not see things you don't want to see. And so I just want to know like how you came about to this approach.
Sure. So it was a bit of a combination of a few different things. As I mentioned, the first analysis that we did, it is one that comes more from the academic literature, and so and it takes a decent amount of work to do. And so there are not too many states that are doing it yet. There are some free to use tools online that researchers have made available, and there are some states that are doing it. Normally, though, it's done in academic arenas. And so, for example, the state of North Carolina has a lot of stops data. They've never looked at it from the state level, yet researchers at Chapel Hill, at UNC Chapel Hill, have done that for them. As for other comparable state databases, we've modeled our approach most directly after the state of Connecticut. The director of the state of Connecticut who has done that work, he was actually brought out, this precedes my time at the commission, but he was actually brought out to testify on the bill as it was being developed. And so there was a lot of technical assistance that was provided there by Connecticut in that analysis. As far as input to our analytical approach, as we were building this, we did engage with stakeholders. We also tried to work with the original task force or working group that was put together to create 2355. And so that would have included representatives from inside and outside government, and then also by some BIPOC groups. That is a group that many folks have gone their separate ways. Since 2017, they're in different jobs. One of the members used to be Constantine Severe, who is the head of IPR, the police review board or the police review group in Portland, but now works for the governor. And so because of shifting, we don't utilize that group anymore. And COVID has made it a little bit difficult to pull folks together. But certainly any feedback that we have from folks who are knowledgeable in this area, we try to be as transparent as possible. Our report online, it all contains many pages of all the technical appendices of how we do things. We'd be more than happy to send out our code. Our data is mostly something that we can send out. There are a couple statutory limitations on some of the location information that we can't send out, but we welcome any input that folks have on our approaches, or it's definitely that common trope that you can say anything you want with statistics, but we try to be as transparent as possible, and that's the way that we try to get around that, is that if we have results that are reproducible by folks who have a similar level of knowledge, then that would be the way that we try to shield against simply looking the other way if we find something that doesn't match with a worldview or a political stance or something like that. Oh, and I apologize. I see, lips moving, but on mute.
That's okay. It's always my trick. So mine is a much different question, and I don't know how you would capture this, but when I'm looking at the 2019-2021 statistic around search and that big difference between Hispanic, the predicted and actual, do we know what language was being spoken during the stop or during the search, what started that? Because I think that's a big issue. And do searches happen because there is a language barrier and it's just, well, I'm going to go ahead and search because this looks like the sketch guy and he's not speaking my language. So that's being very crude, but that's a concern I have.
Sure, that's a great question that unfortunately I can't answer. We don't have that level of detail from the stop, but I do know through discussions with other agencies. I know that in the city of Fort Valley, this was a concern for a while, that at one point they were looking at the duration of traffic stops, and this was before the day. This was data that they were running on their own, but they're looking at traffic stop duration, and they saw that there was a pretty significant disparity for Hispanic individuals, and a lot of that came down to language barriers. And so we had individuals who, they were being stopped for longer periods of time during their day and detained by the police, and it was simply due to that fact, and that was something that they worked very hard to try to remedy, and so we know that can be a factor, but that's not something that we have in our data set, unfortunately.
So how are you going to capture that then?
That's a good question. when we designed the database, it was done based on the statutory data points that we were asked to collect. And we were provided with funding by the legislature of around $2 million to do that. And so at this point, we would have to give a new funding ask to be able to change that through all of our data systems and to work with our agencies. And so I'd say that at the moment, we do not have a plan to do that, but it's simply because we don't have the resources to do so. And so that's something that would remain unexplored. However, I would encourage you to work with your local police department if this is something that you are concerned about, because I don't know if that's a data point. I would not want to speak for the chief that that's something they collect, but certainly departments have a richer data set oftentimes than what we are able to get at the state.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi there, I had a question for you.
Yes.
When you guys are working on these studies, who identifies the race of the person stopped?
The officer who is involved. All of the demographic factors are identified by the perception of the officer.
Okay, so the reason why I asked this question is because I know that, and this is very common, we're talking about Hispanics being listed as a race when technically Hispanics can be Latino, excuse me, they can be white, Black, or Native. And so if this is going based off of the officer's perception, there's a pretty good margin of that being incorrect. If they're simply saying that that person is fair skinned, so they must be white when they're actually Latino. Same goes for Black and Native.
That's right. That is correct. And that's partially actually by design. First what I'll mention is that the inclusion of Hispanic as a racial category as opposed to an ethnicity, that was a decision made by a stakeholder group as this was being rolled out, simply to try to combine this into a single category of questions to avoid confusion when filling out the data form. But when I mentioned this was done partially by design, is that what we're trying to assess in these cases is what is in the officer's mind. And so if the officer looks at an individual and let's say for the sake of the argument that they are targeting Hispanic or Latino individuals, if they look at somebody and that person is so fair-skinned that they do not register that person as being a member of that group, they consider them white and therefore they do not pull them over, then that's essentially what we want to know. However, if they look at somebody who may actually self-identify as white, but perhaps they have a darker skin tone and the officer pulls them over thinking they are Hispanic, that's what we want to know. We want to know that that officer thought the person was Hispanic when they effectuated the stop, and therefore they're recorded as such. We are not able in this to be able to tell the true race of the individual. And this was a major discussion point in the beginning of the program because we don't have race on driver's licenses, so we don't have an administrative way to detect somebody's race once this happens. And I know that there was it was across all stakeholders that we talked to, that at least in our groups, nobody thought that having officers walking up to a window of a stopped individual and asking for the license and registration and what's your race was going to be something that would be beneficial either. And so it's partially because, like I said, we're trying to look into the mind of the officer, but then two, we don't have that ability to get race any other way. In the state of Texas, they actually, and I'm not sure how they get this information. My brother lives in Texas, I'll have to ask him, but they actually put the race of the driver on the ticket. And it's the actual race is what it's supposed to be. And so Texas, they can check this, but in Oregon, we cannot. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
And I see another question from the chair.
Thank you, Ken. You've been really patient with all of our questions, and I really appreciate that. Is there a way that we measure for socioeconomic status or price of the car, age of the car? Are they pulling over poor people more than non-poor people? Is there a way to measure that?
That's a great question. And we do not. That would be one thing that if I had been here in 2017 doing this job, I would have advocated for. But there's only one state in the country that, at least as of a year or so ago when I last checked, collects that information. The state of Wisconsin does collect year, make, and model of the car. I think that would be amazing if we had that, because I think that you're right, that could both be used to check for socioeconomic status, but then also I do think that at times there could be some assumptions on the race of drivers based on those factors as well. But in the negotiations amongst the legislators who came up with the list, it was not included.
I don't know how much more of your presentation there is, and I'm watching the time tick. Maybe we could hold our questions and let you finish.
Sure, I just have 2 slides and then you can continue to fire away.
Perfect.
So the final analysis that we conduct, as I mentioned, it looks at search outcomes. And luckily, this is also the one I always like to finish on it because it's just the most straightforward. What we look at here is we try to look at successful searches and to use those successful search rates as a proxy to determine whether we have an equal standard being applied. So what this looks at is we look at successful searches across different racial groups, because what we would hope is that if we have officers who are applying the same standards to everyone they encounter, then they should be equally as good at predicting whether somebody has contraband and therefore equally as good at search outcomes for those individuals. If, however, if I'm looking for furtive movements or lack of eye contact, if I only apply that to one group as opposed to another, then we're going to see different rates of outcomes across our different racial groups. And so we have here on the side, these are the outcomes that we reported for all of our different groups across 3 years of data collection. The base comparison group is our white group, and then we're trying to measure whether those are statistically significant differences as well there. So you'll see some differences. We see that we have lower search outcome rates for all of our non-white groups across these different analyses. However, partially due to sample size, but then also you'll see in a moment comparing Beaverton to its other sister agencies, we've not found statistically significant differences. One thing that I'll note, though, that is separate from the discussion of outcomes by race that I think is one of the more fascinating things we've seen come out of the effects that we've seen from COVID over the last few years is that one prediction that the literature had long made, but had never really seen come to fruition because there had been nothing to kind of lead to it, is that when you have officers who are exercising more discretion when they choose whether or not to search somebody, in other words, they're searching folks less, oftentimes the prediction was they would be better at search outcomes because they're thinking about it a little bit harder and they're really only searching the folks who they absolutely need to search. And what's interesting about our COVID period here is that we've seen pretty consistently across the past few years a drop in the number of searches and certainly in the share of searches that are being conducted. But you'll also notice that across all of our different racial groups or racial or ethnic groups, we've seen pretty substantial improvements in the number of successful searches, which means that we are searching fewer folks who didn't need to be searched. And we are overall doing better at what we're doing. And so I just wanted to note that independent of the differences we see across our racial groups here, that this is something that's interesting that the natural experiment of COVID is actually leading us to. And so what we can see here, like I mentioned, we don't find statistically significant difference across our groups. But then also I'll just note that the city of Beaverton PD overall, its successful search outcomes is relatively high compared to other agencies across the state. The last thing I'll leave with are 2 figures here. Beaverton PD is highlighted in yellow for each of these charts. And the higher it is up going towards the upper right-hand portion of the chart, the more successful the searches are on average. And so you can see that compared to its sister agencies, it's not the best, but it's also among the upper half as far as successful search outcomes overall, which I think is a good thing. But those are the slides that I have for you all tonight. So I would be happy to take any more questions that you have in the time that we have remaining.
Can we call it something different than a hit? That's kind of does that stand for something?
Oh, This was an analysis that was actually originally created in the 1960s, and it's called the KPT hit rate, which is the Knowles per second. It's basically for the person's name. It's how often they hit. We've actually tried to scrub. There's a couple different problematic analysis names, and we've tried to scrub them all. And I guess I left it on this slide, and I apologize for that. That's why I tried on the previous one to call it the successful search analysis. But yeah, hit rate's a little bit crude.
I think Spencer has his hand up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Two things. There were about 13,000 stops in Beaverton. Is 1.3% of the population, realizing that not all the stops are people that live here. Is that sort of normal? And secondly, wouldn't it make more sense to collect stop data at 10 o'clock at night rather than 6? At 10 o'clock, the people who are out and about may be out and about, most likely for recreation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Please finish.
No, that's it.
Oh, first, we do collect the information for stops being made at any time. It is simply for the one analysis of the comparisons in daylight versus darkness. We limit the analysis to these bands that are around what is the earliest sunset in the year. So basically, like in the evening, for example, we would keep any stop that happens after 4:30, but then we would cut that off, and this is maybe where Kelly, if she remembers, could help me out. We cut it off probably around 9:45. I think that's the latest. It gets dark here in the summertime, so we don't get 10 o'clock, but we do get a pretty wide band within that evening stop window. But we do have the data for those other times of day. We just don't necessarily we don't include it in that analysis. And then the other one, as far as stop volume is concerned, we've not noticed for the size of the Beaverton population that is higher or lower than the share of other cities that we have looked at. One complicating factor with that is that while we have a recording for every stop, it is not known whether somebody has stopped multiple times. I do know that at one point when I was 16, I got pulled over twice in 1 year. So then my equivalent would be in the data twice. And so it's a little bit difficult to say that these are all 100% unique individuals stopped throughout the year. Though I would also say that the share of individuals who are stopped multiple times compared to the share of folks who are just stopped once, that would be lower. So it would not necessarily say, that would drive those numbers entirely.
Thank you. If no one else is there, just one quick comment. If Portland residents are the largest percentage of people commuting to and from Beaverton, as I think you mentioned, Nike's in Beaverton, and if you're including Aloha, so is one of the two big Intel plants, which would, in my mind, affect who's driving.
Certainly, and that's one area to where, aside from the fact that my neighbor, I'm not sure if my neighbor goes to the Intel. He works at Intel, so I'm not sure if he commutes to Beaverton, or I believe he might commute to Hillsborough. But that shows that somebody from Little Silverton down here in Marion County, we contribute to that commuting population as well. But certainly, I think that the types of industries, the types of businesses are also going to be something that may partially determine what that driving population looks like, just as much as the source of the what city the person is coming from. And so I think that is something that it's hard for us as researchers in Salem to have that detailed knowledge of every city in the state. And so that's, again, why we rely on you all. We do have really good location information for these stops. And so certainly when we have cities or jurisdictions reach out and they would like to have more information, that's one thing we could talk about, is we could put, color-coded stops by race on a map of the city. And then we could look at those and begin to look for patterns. But certainly for someone like me, I would not know where Intel was located, but perhaps there are lots of stops around Intel or around a shopping mall or around other areas. And that's something that again, a group like yours could investigate because you have that intimate knowledge that we don't. And perhaps there's some things that you could let us know about the patterns that you see, and that could help us to understand what we're seeing on our end too.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
There's a question in the chat about whether there's a drop down for gender in each group.
A drop down in gender on our dashboard, for example.
Yeah.
We have just revamped our dashboards. I don't think we have a way to just filter by gender, but if that's something that folks are interested in, then we could take that back to our dashboard visualization person, and we could think about whether that's a way to, whether there's a way we could put that in.
I might jump in real quick. I know we have just a summary page that shows gender and race, and so it doesn't have the conclusions of the analysis, but if you just want to see, you know, how many Black, Hispanic men breakdowns, we have that information.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you. That's right. We do have the gender breakdown. That's for sure. What I was thinking when I thought drop down was if we want to have the racial breakdown, but then you want to look at only men by racial group or whether only women by racial group. We don't currently have that functionality, but that's something that, again, this is actually, we love this because if there's any suggestions on things that people would like to see online, we usually don't have folks reach out to us. And so any feedback we get, that's something we can take back and try to provide.
I have a quick question. So now that we've presented this, and this may be for both you, Ken and Chief, now that we have this data, where do we go from here?
Sure. I think that from having the bird's eye view of looking across all different agencies, I would say that the results for Beaverton are on the good side, and they're, if nothing else, pretty consistent with the other tier ones that we see. We do see that we had those red indicators of disparities in the predicted disposition. Partially those disparities have motivated an additional level of data collection that we've worked on with a lot of our tier ones. One limitation that we have in the data right now is that we only have the reason for a stop. We don't actually have the reason for the outcome, and that's something that we're very interested in. And so we've been collecting that, and that's one of our next steps of analysis for this coming year. And so I have to admit, much of what we are focused on at the commission is on the data analysis. When an agency is indicated within our report, or certainly also if an agency would want to voluntarily work on any of these concerns, statutorily there is a mechanism for that. So the police academy that we have here in Salem, the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, they are statutorily mandated to offer trainings, technical assistance, and other help to agencies. Like I said, we usually focus on the data. Sometimes the data can help explain what's happening, and then that could lead to direct action by an agency. Sometimes the data is a little bit unclear, and that's when we would have them work with DPSST. But then I would have to defer to Chief there as far as anything on those lines. But I would say that for the standards that we have set, again, for this state level comparison of different agencies, the city of Beaverton is in line with what we are expecting. And so they've not been referred in the past to DPSST in a formal sense, which is, again, something that we do by statute. So, but certainly I would say that given the number of presentations I've made and the work that I've done with the chief over these past 3 years, Beaverton PD has been very, very engaged with us. I mean, I'd say that there are probably 4 or 5 agencies across the state that I regularly talk to, and Beaverton is one. So I know that this is something that is certainly has the chief's attention and genuine concern.
And I can kind of piggyback on that as well. So, and Ken is right. We do take this information very seriously, and internally, we take the stops data every year. We really take a hard look at it and incorporate our training. For example, our unconscious bias training that we would do at a in-service training, or the diversity, equity, and inclusion training that we're doing. So we do try and tailor our future trainings A lot of it's, based on obviously a lot of different things, but one of the things is what our stops data is showing. And that is reinforced as well to new officers down at the academy and through the internal academy before they even go out on patrol. So yeah, with all that, I think that the stops data is something we welcome the results every year to see just how we are doing in these areas and what we can do better.
And I guess one other thing I would is that for any of these, so if we say there's a disparity in citations for, for a given group, the agencies have this data as well, but we're more than happy to help them to isolate down and to say like, okay, let's look at those patterns of Hispanic citations or of Asian citations, and we can try to isolate those and discuss the patterns that we see on a research level with our police partners as well. And then that is something that, this is not something we've necessarily had to do with Beaverton, but we've done with other agencies where we've delved into different officer shifts and again patterns for who is being stopped in traffic team versus non-traffic team stops. These are things that we're more than willing and to do with agencies when they want to try to unpack what they're seeing, because sometimes sometimes there's a relatively simple answer in those data that could lead to a change in policy or just a change in training. But then sometimes they're a little bit harder to find.
Thank you very much. I have one final question before we probably should look at our clock. I'm curious, the gender data that is used that you track, is that from the ID or is it perceived by the officer?
That one, it is statutorily, and the guidance we provide is that is supposed to be the perception of the officer. However, because gender is on the driver's license, as is age, we know that some officers and some agencies will look at the driver's license. I'm not sure if that's something that the chief, I'm not sure if you all directly train on that or if you rely just on our materials. We have like an online training that we offer through our website to new folks as they come into the system, but I'm not sure if that's something that they train on more directly.
Yeah, to be quite honest, I don't know if the officers use if it's the perception or the driver's license. I don't want to answer and give you the wrong answer, so I can certainly ask and loop back with Paolo or Alexis on that one.
Yeah, and that's one too where I think that probably as far as using the license, age is probably done even more than gender. I remember my days of tending bar when I was young, and I was a terrible judge of age. That was always very hard.
Thank you. All right, so we are a little behind schedule, but I would like to take a moment and thank you guys for the thoroughness and thoughtfulness in bringing us your presentation this year and patiently answering all of our questions. I just really want to thank you, all of you, Ken and Officer Kelly, and even Chief Groshong. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And can we email you if we have more questions?
Please do. Yes, it was our pleasure.
Yeah, so if you have questions, Ken, would you prefer them to come through me to you, or how would you prefer that?
Either way, yeah.
Okay.
If it's something, yeah, I think that would be fine. If folks want to email directly, my email is on the presentation, but also, yes, if folks would like to go through you, then that's perfectly fine too.
Either way.
Fantastic. Thanks. I really appreciate this presentation every year that we get it. So I really do. So moving forward is the report of our standing subcommittee. We have one standing subcommittee, and that is run by Spencer. Spencer, would you like to report?
Short report, Joy. We are in the preliminary stages of formulating an outcome for where we're where we're headed in terms of defining the kind of community-based review panel that would work best for Beaverton.
Fantastic.
Hopefully in a month, when we come back, we'll have the outcome and the goal. Thanks.
Fabulous. Okay. And Sabdy has an update on the Art and Data Project.
Hi there. Okay, so I believe we touched on the Art and Data Project during our first meeting last month, but quick recap for the newbies. The Art and Data Project was an initiative launched by the 2021 HRAC committee as a means of gathering community safety related questions and data from our community. And so we are talking about for 2022, moving that from a subcommittee to a topic that, or an initiative rather, that HRAC as a whole tackles. And the other thing we're talking about is, given the ongoing fluctuations with COVID and can we meet up in person or not, and what the restrictions are, we are going to push for a digital version of this project. So using QR codes to gather data, and then also expanding the types of questions that we're asking beyond community safety. Joy, did I miss anything? No? Okay.
Sure, more questions. Yeah, keep talking, yeah.
So of course it is a little bit of an issue because we can't really see people the way we want to in person given COVID, but the benefit is that now we get to ask more questions because everything is going to be collected digitally. So there's lots more to come on that in terms of how it will be done, QR codes, where we're going to pop up, what the questions will be, and we'll be discussing this further during the retreat, but that's at least the top level version of what's happening with that. Any questions?
That Sabdy and I chatted, and I will say when I worked at the homeless shelter that Beaverton opened last year, I worked there briefly, every single person there had a cell phone. And so it seems to me that with by going digital, we could actually reach more people and have less bias or skew, because it seems that folks have cell phones and they don't necessarily go to the farmers market. They don't necessarily go where we are, especially in COVID world where I am not going by very many people. So it seems that if we can target well, maybe we can have a bigger sample size with less socioeconomic skew and get some good data. That would be wonderful.
And have it in multiple languages.
Right. And we have city resources where we can get translation. We have access to more resources if we use city resources like the water bill or the utility bills or the library, or there's just more access if we use what's already here instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and go places in a world where we were listening, Lisa, none of us want COVID.
Any other questions? Okay.
That sound interesting, guys?
Absolutely.
Some nodding, anyone sound uninteresting? Cameron,
I hope you guys are interested.
Or shake your head.
When we have the retreat, we'll be able to discuss this further. And I think it'll also be a good opportunity to kind of refresh our brains on what the data was from last year, because there are definitely some questions, some new questions that can kind of come out of that. So more to come.
Building. Yes, I like it. So should we talk about? Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Joy. I just wanted to mention to you all that I heard something kind of exciting today that I thought I would just pass along, which is that the community vision folks are working on finalizing questions, and they are talking about using one of the key questions that you all came up with in that Art and Data Project as a public safety question. And it was actually Chief Groshong who suggested, why don't we use a similar or the same question so that we can just add to that knowledge base. So So kudos to you all for being really thoughtful about that and that's being integrated. So more on that later.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
that's great. Of
Thank
course,
you for letting us
we're
know.
completely objective, but I think we rock.
Basically.
That's the message basically.
Yay.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, yay, us. We're great. I think when we work together, we can accomplish so much. It's awesome. All right. So updates to the HRAC webpage, Sabdy.
Yes. Okay. So Paolo sent out an email requesting for you guys to send in any updates that you had. And the hope was that if we send them all to him, then Paolo and I, with Joy, can kind of get a list going of things that we'd like to see on the website to be updated. I haven't connected with Paolo today since he's out to see if he's received anything, but does anyone that didn't email something and already have something to add in terms of website edits, additions, corrections? I think
Are you
everyone's
asking that I tell you right now?
Did you already email it into Paolo?
I did.
Okay, if you emailed it to Paolo, you don't have to bring it up now because we just haven't connected today. Okay, if this is the reminder moment for anyone here, please, if you think of something later today, we do want our HRAC website to be as robust and informative as possible and as accurate as possible. So if you do see something or have an idea, please email it to Paolo so we can get the ball rolling. Okay.
Awesome. It's our chance to have a say. All right, HRAC retreat updates. Who's excited? I'm excited to get together and actually gel as a group. I will say that in all the years I've been working in groups, which is more than a couple, I have not found a way to really get to know people unless we sit around and eat a meal. So I've been very firm about wanting to get together and socially distanced outside. We have a reservation at BG's Food Cartel up by the tap house, the bar part, where there's heaters and cover, but it's outside. We have a reservation for 2 tables at noon on Saturday, which is also my birthday, and we can get food and sit down and eat our meal. I would like to ask 3 things of you guys, if you can come. And one, I would like to know a little about each of you, because we learned so much. I remember, Cameron, I'm going to pick on you just a little bit, but you chatted at our retreat year before last, and it was really cool to see that side of you that when we're on a Zoom meeting or trying to get business done and moving forward, we don't get to see the fun, silly, interesting part of each other. And I want to see that. So I would like to know a little bit about you. I would like to know why you decided of all the commissions you wanted to come and join this one. And I would also like to know maybe your top 3 issues that are the most important to you in regards to human rights. I want those 3 answers. We bring those on Saturday. I will bring my computer.
So will you put those in the chat at some point, or
Sure.
can someone throw those in the chat?
You bet.
And how long is the meeting this weekend?
I have a reservation for 2 hours.
Okay. Thanks for doing that, because otherwise I'm going to be like, what did she say?
Right, and there's some really amazing food. They have pulled pork macaroni and cheese that I just love, and it's gluten-free. So I'm, Does anyone have any thoughts or suggestions? Or I'm going to bring a computer, but you lose something because of Zoom. I mean, it's not the same. Though we will be socially distanced, I can bring my box of M95s if you'd like. Any discussion? We're usually more chatty than this.
I'm excited.
I am too. Get to see
I'm
people.
excited.
And I think, you know, I'm vaccinated. I feel like it's all you can do.
Yeah. I'll add in that even though last year all of our HRAC meetings were over Zoom, we did have the opportunity for those who worked on the Art and Data project to meet up a couple of times in person, and it did make a huge difference. Just having that time to just chit chat with each other while we were chit chatting with the community.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know another way to do that. Then at least we can sit around, pick giant picnic tables outside and eat. I don't know any other way. Does anyone else have another way to do that?
And it's not mandatory, right? So it's like
It's
people
not
can-
mandatory. So you'll miss, I mean, you miss something.
Who's
by-
planning? And do we know who's planning on going? Do we have like a head count?
How about that? Who's planning? I can't see Amy or Karen.
Molly says also.
Molly says yes.
Okay.
Corey's going.
Corey.
Okay, and Corey's a yes. And then
Amy's not
Amy's
sure.
a maybe. I know you have a conflict. Sorry. Do you want
Yeah.
the Zoom link? Do we need a Zoom link if we're all there?
Yeah, are people gonna go if we do it if we have a Zoom?
We don't, yeah, do we need to have a Zoom? Because the other thing is I do have an app on my phone called Mine, and it's 1-to-1. So I could, if there was one person who needed to go, I could call you online and you'd be a video call, but it would accommodate a person if they needed to come. Like if Karen was the only one who couldn't come, could call you online. That I would never embarrass you or single you out or anything.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that I think because my email address was not correct, I got nothing in the past month. I have no idea that any of this was going on. I didn't get any minutes. It's like, so I had no idea this retreat was happening, and I've made plans with family to be in Seattle. So I don't think it would be very good for me to do a Zoom thing. And I'm really sorry because I would have liked to participate.
Well, it's only part
Darn.
1. We haven't started talking about part 2 yet.
Yeah.
But we'll
Would
see.
you
You're
like me
last.
to send in the answers to my questions?
Oh, that'd be good.
To your
Yeah.
questions? Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, and I know that Alexis will you send her everything? That would be great, because if she's missing it, that's terrible. We need to catch you up.
Thank
We'll
you.
get that corrected.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
get all the emails either this month. I got some of them, but I didn't get the Zoom link this month. I don't know if there was something.
I didn't get that either.
We didn't get the Zoom link this month. We got it. See, Paolo spoils us. So Alexis sent us it in January, but we didn't get it again.
Yeah,
in
I did
January.
find that, and that's how I got here. But
That's how I got on. Yeah.
Okay.
So Alexis, Paolo spoils us because we're his favorite.
Yeah, each board does it a little bit differently.
She
She's so
expects us to
spoiled.
be grown-ups is the problem.
No, for DAB, I just have everybody use the general public link because the individual links were causing problems. But this board does it differently, and so yeah,
Embarrassing.
apologies for not getting those back to you. I'm sure that we.
Okay.
I'm sure that
very
will.
pampered here
go
on
back into
HRAC.
sync.
We
Right.
need extra
Yes.
support.
Of course, because we're special.
Although I'm a millennial, I don't know how to use Zoom. So,
Hilarious. So year before last, we had an in-person, it was like a 6-hour day, and it was at was it Filipino food? It was wonderful. We got to meet people.
Puerto Rican.
Yeah, it was yeah. And so in the morning we got acquainted, then we had a meal, and in the afternoon we planned for the year. And that's kind of how we're breaking it. So this is the getting together, talking to each other, eating a meal. Then after this, we'll plan for part 2, which will be once we know the answers to your questions, like what's really important to you with human rights, then we know what direction we can go in. And we have a little time to do it because we have the stop data today. We have things, annual things to take up space. So we have time to deal with Zoom and COVID and not miss really the good weather we have coming. So that was the thought in breaking the retreat into 2 pieces at least. One, to get to know each other, talk, gel, see what comes up. You know, it's amazing when you sit and talk to each other in person, the kinds of ideas that gel and come up and like, oh, that's great, let's do that. And I'm hoping we get that.
Do we have a date for the second part of this?
Not yet. Not yet. And when you get all this stuff, please, you know, you guys can reply to Paolo or Alexis if she's still covering, and so that we have the information going to one place. Then we're not playing telephone. There's a clear place for the information to go and come to us in leadership so that we can hear all of you.
Is Paolo coming? Is he sick?
Well, if he has shingles, he shouldn't be.
He has shingles? I didn't hear that.
Yeah. He shouldn't
Won't be coming this weekend.
Oh,
Lily, you? Are you coming?
Would it be useful for me to be there?
only if you want to come, have fun, and eat food.
And celebrate my birthday. It's a
And
big,
yeah, and celebrate a birthday. No
it's a
pressure.
big one. It's a big one with
Only
a
if you're
zero.
fun. I mean,
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know. We can't assume anything, right, Lisa? We try not to judge people.
yeah.
So
Only,
we're
only
not
if
gonna
you're,
judge
you know, if you're fun, you're welcome. Just kidding.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, poor Paolo. Maybe we should make him a card at retreat. Does anyone have a like card laying around, a get well soon card?
I have art supplies, so I'm sure I can bring some stuff and we can get into all kinds of trouble with art supplies.
Yeah, we can make him a
You make
get
a vision board.
Ooh,
We could. Do we want to? Do we want to do that?
just bring like a big sheet of paper and some markers. Do you have some?
Okay, because we only have 2 hours and I asked 3 questions. And there's 12 of us here, so. Now we can stay longer if we want.
Markers and a big sheet of paper. I
Okay.
vote for that.
I will bring a big, yes, Tanya.
Oh, no, I was voting. I vote whenever I can, wherever I can, so.
I love that. Yes, everybody vote. All right. Is there anything else anyone would like to discuss? We're actually ahead of schedule, which never happens.
Didn't we have things that were tabled from before?
Tanya, did we?
I don't know. I'm supposed to know that though, I bet.
Actually, we
Let's look
we
at the
caught up
minutes
with-
from last year or last month.
Well, we did
I don't remember.
3 sets of minutes. Last meeting was January, and we finished all of the last year's minutes, and we approved 3 sets of minutes. So the only minutes we had for 2022 were last meetings.
Right.
I thought we had tabled some other things.
There's nothing on here that's pending.
Oh,
Hi, Cruz, if that's who it is. It is. It's always Cruz.
Anything anybody would like to talk about? I mean, Cameron has been quiet.
I don't, Karen, why don't you, do you want to answer the question since you're not going to be able to come about?
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, extemporaneously with no time to think about it. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about myself because I know that part. So I've lived in Beaverton my entire adult life. Spent my first 9 years as a professional, as a lawyer, and I worked for a number of different jobs. Mostly worked for the government. I collected taxes in bankruptcy court for the IRS. That was so exciting. That drove me out of the profession. And
I bet.
and then I took some time off. I raised 3 kids that are all grown up now and have mostly moved on from Beaverton. And Then I went back to school and got a master's in teaching and taught 4th and 5th grade for 16 years and had a whole lot more fun with that than, arguing about money in bankruptcy court. So what else? I have a lot of hobbies that I pursue. I paint with a small group of friends. I sing with 2 different choirs. I volunteer as a CASA with the foster care system. I belong to the West Hills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I've been a Unitarian Universalist for over 30 years. I've been on a number of boards from the Classroom Law Project, Elliott Institute, the union board. When I was a teacher, I was very involved in the union, both at the state level and the Beaverton level. I chaired the Beaverton Political Action Committee for a while. So I have wide-ranging interests. I really like being a CASA because it combines both my history in law and teaching. I'm really connected
What's
to
a
kids.
CASA?
It's a court-appointed special advocate. So we try to help kids get a permanent placement in the shortest amount of time possible, which isn't always very short. My first case was 4 years before these kids got into guardianship. So that was a little disappointing. But I've been doing it about 5 years now, and I really like that. In COVID, I took up taking piano lessons because I couldn't sing with the choir anymore, and that's been really great. I like to play board games. I love to play pickleball, and I do that at least 3 times a week. So that's a lot about me, not a little. And why I wanted to join the commission, okay, let's go there. Spencer is a good friend of mine. We go to church together and go to Elliott Institute together, and he was talking about it, and I thought, one of my favorite things to teach 5th graders was all about civics and the history of our government and all about natural rights. And I think, well, natural rights are human rights. And so I thought that would be a good match for me. I have 2 daughters-in-law who are people of color, and I have 1 daughter who's transgender. And of course, I grew up and was a lawyer in the 80s, and I had a lot of negative experiences as a female lawyer, let's just put it that way. So I thought that was a good place to be. I was a little disappointed that I'm only an alternate because the commission's not even full, but maybe later. My top 3 human rights issues, that was asked of me in the interview. So let's see if I can remember. Well, police practices for sure. That's been an issue. We hear so much about the difficulties that people of color face with the police. And well, my big issues have always been women's rights and rights for children, because those were the groups that I identified with. And I would just like to make sure that, we get that women are treated the same as men and that children are protected and get the best upbringing and opportunities in life that they can.
Anything like in that specific to Beaverton, like things that?
Yeah, well, Beaverton School District is where I taught, and it's always interesting because you see the headlines in the papers, and they say things like, children of color being left behind again because teachers won't learn this new program for teaching reading. And I can only think to myself, it's 100 hours that they want these teachers to do. Of course, every teacher wants their children to succeed, and every teacher understands that children of color and children who are underprivileged need more. And it's only been since September that they've even been back in school. So anyway, I guess, we're not involved in this committee with Beaverton School District, but those are our future citizens. So yeah, I don't really know. I don't know what the breadth of options there are for, what can we do? What groups, what in the city is available to us? So, I'm just trying to listen and figure that out right now.
Those are really excellent questions.
Yeah, good starting points for our
Yeah.
We can
See,
think about this weekend.
see, 2 hours isn't very long for us when we get us all together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, well, yeah, we could do a vision board, but we could also do that on our second retreat, do a vision board after we know each other, because we just learned 42 new things about character.
Right. Yeah, there'll be a quiz.
And
now.
we haven't even really
He's gonna
started.
teach
I'm
us
like,
all piano
Exactly.
and law.
right? I'll pull out my guitar and my
Yeah.
cello.
I have a ukulele.
Oh, excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Joy, for asking.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Cameron, you're unlikely to come. Do you want to answer the 3 questions? Can we see you? Can we hear you? Awesome guy, by the way, in the picture. Maybe
is.
we don't get to see him. Okay. He's a fig Newton of our imagination.
There you go.
All right, Amy, are you coming? Do you
Bad
think?
internet connection.
I think I might be coming. I have a commitment that I think I can probably get out of, so I'm hoping to be able to come. So yeah.
That would be great. I'd love
Right.
it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about all you guys.
So please correspond with Alexis so that, or Paolo, if he's coming, to get a hold of me to know, do I need to bring a computer? Can we just use line on the phone? Or are we just going to be in person kind of thing? So that's an open question for this Saturday, and stuff happens. So if there's 2 or more folks who actually want to attend, because I understand, Karen, you're going to be in Seattle and busy. So it's not like you're just going to be not here. You're also busy. So I understand, and we'll miss you, but thank you. We've just learned 112 things about you. Anyone else, please reach out so that I know, am I bringing a computer? Are we doing a phone? Or are we just going to meet and go from there?
And Cameron, if you want to type in your responses, you can type them into the chat
Yeah.
briefly. If you can do that, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Anybody running for council?
Ashley.
She did reach out. She's in Seattle. She was on a train. So
she has to rerun this year?
Mhm.
she does, because
Oh.
she was running for the remainder of Lacey's term,
Wow.
who had
Okay.
resigned from her city council position to take mayor, which left a year on her term. So she ran for that year and immediately turned around and ran again. And I envy her 2 campaign expenses in a row.
Mhm.
I don't think
Oh,
she's opposed though, yet. Is she opposed?
I'm sorry, I need to just jump in and say that you all are on very, very delicate ice here. I
Oh,
would
thanks
suggest
for
that you have this conversation at a different time, because
Sure.
it can very
Sorry.
easily get into a advocacy or a talking about one candidate over another. Totally okay.
Of course,
Totally okay.
of course.
We were just curious.
Yeah.
Yes, because the details matter. So we'll move on.
Absolutely.
Well, I can let you go 9 minutes early if you'd like.
No, please let me stay here. I've got work to do still.
All right. Okay,
I
well,
do
it is-
have, if I can, I do have one quick thing to throw out that could be part of the retreat, but not everybody's going to be there, and we probably won't see everybody for combined for both sessions. I don't think anybody in Beaverton knows anything about us, and I think we need to get some things on our calendar. We've participated in Pride before, so maybe that's a given. There's Welcoming Week, and we need to be part of that. And there's a way, I think, for us to have input into who gets to come, which groups from different parts of the community can come and make food and participate in that. I would like to see us participating in the night market when assuming that comes around. And
I love tabling.
if there's free tabling available at the market, I'm sorry, at the farmer's market, I think we should be there a few times during the season, all for the purpose of getting the word out that we are here and that part of our charter or bylaws is to receive information from members of the community who don't have another way to address the city with whether it's a complaint or feel that they're being unfairly singled out in some way. And this is the beginning of my 3rd year, and I've never heard anything from anybody in the 2 years I've been here. So I think we need to do some public relations. Certainly sharpening up the website will help with that, but that's too passive for me, and I think we need to get out there. So that's what I would throw out.
I vote yes. I like to vote.
Seems reasonable. Yeah.
As much as possible. I like voting. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's talk about that at the retreat.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for tonight's meeting. It was awesome. And I will see you guys on Saturday. And if not, I will see you in 4 weeks exactly.
And
All right.
special thanks to Alexis for being here to cover for us tonight and support us and keep us out of
Thank
trouble.
you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Like,